Good morning. Good morning, Joe from Melbourne. So you can sit, comfortably with the talk. You don't need to be quite so formal if you want to. Today I'm going to speak a little bit, not directly from a case from the Gateless Barrier, but from the commentary. So the Gateless Barrier is a collection of koans. This particular edition is got commentaries by Robert Aiken Roshi, one of the teachers in our lineage, our Diamond Sangha lineage. And this is one of my favorite books, which is evidenced by the condition that it is in. Very well worn. Case 3, Chu Chi raises one finger. Robert Aiken tells a story of a nun, and I would like to speak a little bit about her. So Chu Chi was famous for raising a finger when asked a question. He probably didn't do it absolutely every time he was asked a Dharma question, but there's someone coming in. But he frequently raised his finger in response to questions about the Dharma. And he awakened his students by doing that. When they asked a question, he raised a finger. And over time, his students understood what that was about. But earlier on in his practice, he wasn't doing that. Early in his practice, one of the things he did was to sit by himself, solitary practice, sitting in a hut. And this is a great practice, sitting alone in a hut. It's a great practice. It can be romanticized a little bit as the ultimate thing to do. The most, the greatest practitioners can sit still in a hut for months, weeks, months, or years. But there is a way of sitting in a hut that's not always good for practice, especially early in practice. Early in practice, it can be a way to not engage with the complexities of the world. So it's probably a better practice to do after someone has been meditating for a while and working for a teacher for a while and studying the sutras for a while. Then I think sitting in a solitary retreat, it can be a very beneficial practice. So I'm going to read the story that Aiken Roshi describes in his commentary on this case. And read out a number of paragraphs and then go back and go over each one at a time. One day towards evening, a nun named Chisei, appeared at his hut, Chu Chi's hut. Yamada Roshi translates her name as True World, an interpretive rendering that is quite interesting. The Chinese ideographs could mean either true encounter or true boundary. So Yamada Roshi is implying that Chi presents the most vital quality of human life as well as its extent. So we're going to call her True World. True World did not knock or call out when she arrived, but just walked into the hut where Chu Chi was meditating. It was probably a one-room cottage. Traditionally, such cottages were just 10 feet square. And there was Chu Chi sitting in Zazen right in the center. Without taking off her sedge hat, she walked around him 3 times and then stood before him saying, "If you can say an appropriate word, I will take off my hat." Circumambulation is a ritual found in traditional societies all over the world. In Zen Buddhism, it is an act of self-presentation by a pilgrim to a teacher. It is then followed by 3 bows to the floor and other procedures. True World did not observe the proper ritual, however, and Chu Chi was unable to respond. He seemed dumbstruck. So True World walked around him 3 times again, stood before him and said, "If you can say an appropriate word, I will take off my hat." Again, he was unable to speak. She repeated her performance still a 3rd time. Silence. So she turned on her heel and walked out. When Chu Chi finally came to himself, he went to the door after her and called out, "It will be dark soon. Why don't you stay the night?" She turned around and said, "If you can say an appropriate word, I will stay the night." He still couldn't say a word, so she left. Chu Chi was downcast. He felt he'd been defeated by True World and thought, "I'm going about this matter of finding realization in the wrong way. I need a good teacher." He packed his gear, and then, because it was dark, he sat nodding by his back, waiting for the dawn. Suddenly, the tutelary deity of the mountain appeared there in the dark and said, "Don't leave. A great Zen master will come here soon, and you can consult him. You can consult with him." So Chu Chi unpacked his gear and waited. Sure enough, in a couple of days, Tian Lung appeared, and Tian Lung became his teacher, who also used the teaching of one finger Zen, raising one finger. So I'm going to go through each paragraph. True World, well, I'm missing the first one, the part where True World comes into the hut. True World did not knock or call out when she arrived, but just walked in. It was probably a 1-room cottage. Traditionally, such cottages were just 10 feet square. And there was Chu Chi sitting in Zazen right in the center. Without taking off her sedge hat, she walked around him 3 times and then stood before him saying, "If you can say an appropriate word, I will take off my hat." So it's interesting that True World did not knock or call out when she arrived. She just arrived. And this is what happens to us. Things just arrive. They don't announce themselves that they're going to arrive, they just arrive. Like this morning, I was getting ready to come into the Zendo and I realized that I hadn't brought my okesa with me and instead I brought my rakusu. Well, there was just nothing to be done about that. I couldn't go home and get it. And normally you would wear an okesa when giving a talk, but there you go. Didn't happen. Unannounced, True World arrived and there was no okesa to put on. So how do you respond? How do we respond when True World turns up unannounced? And sometimes we respond in a way that creates hardship for ourselves. We start thinking thoughts and creating stories about ourselves, about other people, about the world. Why does this always happen to me? Or whatever the thoughts are that people generate for themselves. So it's good to remember that things arrive unannounced. Most of the time they arrive unannounced. Last week I was in a parking lot. It was a dirt parking lot. And as I reversed out and went forward, there was a big pothole that wasn't visible because of the front of my car. I went straight into it and it ended up causing like a whole lot of damage to my car. Radiators now pushed up against the engine block and it's just all broken. It's just a pothole in a parking lot. There's just nothing to be done about it. You have to just go through the steps. Drop any story, drop any resistance. Just go through the steps, make the phone calls, organize the repairs. No. So things arrive unannounced. Over and over, they arrive unannounced. And sometimes people say, well, why, when giving talks, do teachers often use these little examples? rather than the really hard problems in life. Like, okay, something small happens unannounced and you deal with it, but what about the big things that happen unannounced? I think there's two reasons I can think of that maybe teachers don't use the big things so often in talks. And that's because the bigger, more dramatic things create a lot of emotion in people listening, and they might get distracted from the talk itself by starting to go off and thinking about what they would do in that situation, or how it reminds them of a terrible thing that happened to them. And so it can create too much emotion, I think, in people in a Dharma talk itself. So I think that would be one reason. But maybe the more important reason is we get these little unannounced visits from True World every day. We get them every day. So that's the place to train. That's the place to train the little things every day, the small things that are just a little bit annoying or a little bit off-putting or make our lives somewhat more complicated or disappointing, including positive things, so with positive things to just gently, receive that way, not to get too excited about the good things either. That's when we really train. It's like running a marathon. You'd be kind of somewhat foolish and would probably fail if you just tried to run one. You'd be much better off practicing, just doing a little bit of jogging around the block and building up before running a marathon. So that's what we can do with our lives. We can practice with the True World, not knocking, but just walking straight in. We can practice every single day. And then when a marathon actually comes, we might be better prepared, which would be good. So then the next paragraph, circumambulation is a ritual found in traditional societies all over the world. In Zen Buddhism, In Zen Buddhism, it is an act of self-presentation by a pilgrim to a teacher. It is then followed by 3 bows to the floor and other procedures. True World did not observe the proper ritual, however, and Chu Chi was unable to respond. He seemed dumbstruck. So the way that True World didn't observe the proper rituals, because the respectful thing to do in these situations when a pilgrim meets with the teacher is they circumambulate and they bow in front of them, offer incense. There's protocols to show your respect and also to create a sense of attention to this exchange that's about to happen. And True World, in this instance, she didn't do that. She just walked around and she didn't take off her hat, which of course would be very much, you don't wear hats inside zendos or in meditation spaces. So she didn't take off the sedge hat, which to keep the sun off her head. She didn't take it off. So she didn't observe the proper rituals. And things happen out of order for us in our lives too. We might go through the steps the way we expect things to unfold, and then they just don't. Things happen in the wrong order. Things don't happen the way we expect or the way one normally would imagine that they would. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they don't. I remember some people here might remember Steve Irwin. He was a very well-known kind of sort of environmentalist, but extremely unusual personality. And not very often do I get affected by people who I don't know at all when they pass away. But when he passed away, I felt very affected by it. And I think it was because he was such an energetic character, and he cared about animals so much, and his sort of message to the world about loving crocodiles and reptiles, his message to the world about that was really taking off. He was incredibly popular in America. People talked about him all the time. When they found out I was an Australian and living there, they always say things like, "Oh, crocodile hunter," to me. And I go, "Ha ha." It's a very common exchange I had with people. So probably I felt some kind of personal connection because people identified me with him, being an Australian living in America. But his career was taking off and people loved him, and his daughter's life was taking off also as a sort of a environmental person as a young child. And then he just died so suddenly in such an, like I think 3 people in the world have died from a stingray piercing them with the poison tip that they have on their tail, and it just happened to him. That was a powerful example of something happening out of order. Really inopportune, just so unfortunate. But that's what happened. And some of you may also be familiar with the book When Bad Things Happen to Good People by Harry Kushner. Kushner. It's an old book, but that book really outlines how bad things happen to good people. Things happening out of order. So True World wasn't doing things in the proper order. She wasn't following the proper rituals. And it's our job to be able to respond to things when they don't follow the proper order, the proper ritual. So True World walked around him 3 times, again, stood before him and said, "If you can say an appropriate word, I will take off my hat." Again, he was unable to speak. She repeated her performance still a 3rd time, silence. So she turned on her heel and walked out. So I wanted to say a little bit about the fact that she was offering to take off her hat. I was thinking about that. She's saying, if you can say a word, I'll take off my hat. And when we take off our hat, say if we go to visit someone and we take off our hat, we're indicating that we're going to relax. We're indicating that we're going to stay, that we're going to settle, we're going to be there. We're not about to leave or go somewhere else. We'll take off our hat, we'll take off our shoes, we'll sit down, we'll have a cup of tea. So she was offering to him, if you can say something, I'll relax and I'll be here with you. I'll be here with you. So it was a very generous offer. It was saying, I will stay and be still and be present with you. You can just say a word. But still he was dumbstruck and didn't know what to say. So she turned on her heel and walked out. And that turning on her heel and walking out, I'm sure all of us have had the experience where something has happened and then it's over. And then we think, wait, I know what I want to say. Or wait, I know what I wish I'd done. And we've just missed the opportunity. It's just gone. True World's walked out. We missed our chance. There's the very famous story, of course, of Emperor Wu meeting Bodhidharma and telling him about all the things he'd done to support Buddhism in China and asking what merit, will I gain from all that I've done? And Bodhidharma says, no merit. And then somewhat shocked by that, he asked, well, who are you that stands before me? And Bodhidharma says, I don't know. And Emperor Wu just doesn't know how to make sense of that conversation. And then later finds out that it was Bodhidharma, the famous Bodhidharma, and he's kind of bereft that he didn't have a better conversation. And so he says to one of his attendants, go find him. And his attendant says, you could send as many people as you like, and he's not going to come back. Because the past doesn't come back. When True World has come in and then she exits, you can't get her back and say, can we do a replay? It doesn't happen that way. But what we can do is learn from that experience. Like, I doubt I will forget my Akesa again. I doubt I'll ever forget it again. I might, I have a feeling I only had to forget it once. I won't forget it again. So I can't go back and redo it, but I can learn from the experience. Definitely can learn from it. When Chu Chi finally came to himself, he went to the door after her and called out, "It is still dark. Why won't you stay? Why don't you stay the night?" She turned around and said, "If you can say an appropriate word, I will stay the night." He still couldn't say a word. And so she left. Chu Chi was downcast. He felt he had been defeated by True World and thought, "I'm going about this matter of finding realization the wrong way. I need a good teacher." He packed his gear and then, because it was dark, sat nodding over his pack, waiting for the dawn. Suddenly, the tutelary deity of the mountain appeared there in the dark and said, "Don't leave. A great Zen master will come here soon and you can consult with him." So Chu Chi unpacked his gear and waited. Sure enough, in a couple of days, Tianlong appeared. So the first part here of him saying, "I'm going about this matter of finding realization the wrong way. I need a good teacher," I think is a very important point. We need good teachers. It's very hard, maybe not even possible to practice alone. Even Shakyamuni Buddha practiced with so many different teachers before he finally sat beneath the tree, and the Bodhi and the morning star were with him. He awoke with the morning star. He didn't awake just by himself. And the only reason he didn't awake like with another teacher specifically is because he was opening up a new teaching that he couldn't find anyone else who had that insight that he was in the midst of having. But he still didn't do it alone. He did it with the earth. There's a point in the story where he puts his hand down to the earth and checks in with her. Is it okay that I'm sitting here so long? And the true earth confirms for him to keep going. So we need to do it with teachers. And sometimes we go out to find a teacher, and sometimes teachers just turn up. And the teachers turn up in lots of different guises. Sometimes they turn up as literal teachers. And much more often, they turn up as True World. They just turn up as True World, doing her thing, circumambulating around us, saying, "Can you respond? What's the appropriate response? How do you respond? How do you respond?" Well, I think that might be enough. Be nice to have time for some conversation. So let's finish with the closing verse and then have questions and answers and comments. And you've got the little card there. Beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Illusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to become it. Okay, so I know Kai is there. She's not visible right now, but Kai, if you want to turn your camera on so we could see you, you don't have to, but it might be nice. And Joe, feel free to just raise your hand if you'd like to comment or ask a question. Hi there, Kai. Kai is from Oregon, so she's joining us. It's the afternoon for her there. Any questions or comments? Kai.
Thank you for your talk. That's all I have to say. It's dinner time here. I'm like hungry.
Well, there you go. You have to respond appropriately to that.
Okay, all right.
I think it's important not to get caught up in experience and awfulize about them, and rather just let them go and accept.
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Did you say when awful things?
Awful lives. Awful lives as a verb.
Yeah.
Don't awful lives.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, just letting it go.
That's what I got from the message.
Oh, good. Well, that's probably one of the most valuable things that we can do is to not add things to difficulties, but just relax and let them be. It's not always. Sometimes we need to do something, but a lot of the time we don't need to do anything. We often say and act far more than we really need to. We would probably have a more relaxed life and probably do less small amounts of harm. None of us, I'm sure, do any great harm to anyone. If we did less, if we relaxed and did less. I thank you for that. Vani?
That arrives when truth arrives in that exact moment. Apart from just sort of taking a moment, is there anything in particular that you would recommend doing or like responding?
Yeah, that's a good question. So just in case it wasn't clear, if when True World arrives, Yvonne was just asking, is there anything you would recommend in that moment? And the thought that I have frequently is that every situation is a perfect situation to wake up. Every situation. There's no exceptions to that. So whatever arises in front of us as confusing or painful or unjust or pleasant, it might be, or boring, however boring it might be, mundane, however mundane it might be. Mundane is, I think, hard sometimes. When we're stuck in a situation where we've got nothing that we can do. We want to do something, but we can't for whatever reason. Even that is a really perfect place to wake up to the nature of reality and who we are in this unknowable reality. So I say that to myself a lot, and that encourages me to be open and receptive to my experience. And I think pretty much always I find when I am open and receptive to my experience, even if it's not one that I wish I was in, I can usually find some way for it to be informative to me in terms of my practice. Did you have thoughts, other thoughts too on that?
I sort of regularly forget this, but when I remember it, it's very helpful to actively welcome things in my mind, like to sort of counteract the aversion that arises.
Yeah. And welcoming, of course, doesn't mean to condone necessarily the thing or be happy about that thing, but just to welcome it in. Yeah. Griffin?
I found an example of True World for being a teacher. Actually, last night I was trying to watch this movie and it got on buffering, and it wasn't going right. And then my dog started freaking out because of the storm. It felt like all of these things just kept on piling on. And I was getting quite worked up about it. And then I just had a moment of just like realizing, oh well, there's nothing I can do about that, and there's no reason to become worked up about any of this stuff. None of it's in my control. It's just, more of these arbitrary things just arriving, and just, taking a moment to just step outside and just think about it as these are just things that just keep arriving, and not having that sort of judgment and being in my mind so much. I find that really helpful, just to let go a little bit.
Yeah. That's right. When something comes, either there is something we can do that would be beneficial for ourselves and other people, or our dog, or whatever it might be, in which case we should just proceed. And if there is nothing that we can do, then it would be good to accept and to just relax into that acceptance. Of course, easy to say, harder to do. This is why it's so wonderful that we get opportunities every single day. And we can miss those opportunities, which is what happened here when Chi sort of says, wait, hold on, don't go, come back, it's dark outside, come back and stay the night. And she doesn't. She said, well, if you can say the appropriate word, I will. And he still didn't know what to do next. So we miss many, many opportunities every day. We miss opportunities. And that's okay. Next time an opportunity comes around, we might just take it. All right, anything else? Any other questions? All right, well, thank you so much for everyone in the agenda for being here, and thank you for people on Zoom for being here. It's an encouragement for us because we're just starting this Sangha, and Sangha needs people, and your presence is really very uplifting for us as we emerge and unfold and grow. So thank you so much for being here.